In this Chemscape presentation, we will look at asbestos, which is a hazardous material and a known carcinogen. Asbestos refers to 6 naturally occurring fibrous minerals. It was widely used in building materials from the 1950s to 1990s due to its strength, insulating, fire, and chemical-resistant properties. Today, asbestos is typically found in older buildings and structures. You may encounter asbestos in these products and industries. 1. Spray applied fireproofing. Used as fire protection for structural supports like beams, columns, walls, and ceilings. 2. Mechanical insulation. Found in mechanical systems such as boilers, tanks, vessels, and pipes. 3. Vermiculite. A lightweight fire-resistant material used in products like attic and wall insulation. 4. Asbestos cement board and tiles. Used in exterior building applications for wall coverings, roofs, heat shields, blackboards, pegboards, and more. 5. Asbestos cement pipes. Found in water supply and drain systems. 6. Friction materials. Used in automobile clutch pads, brake linings, pads, shoes, and transmission components. Buildings built before 1990 may have materials containing asbestos, including drywall taping compound, linoleum, floor tiles, textured decorative coatings like popcorn sealing, roofing materials. Left undisturbed, the risk from asbestos exposure is low. The risk of asbestos exposure significantly increases when materials containing asbestos fibers are disturbed and released into the air, for example, during renovation. Asbestos regulations vary by jurisdiction. Asbestos work is grouped as high, medium, or low-risk activities. Risk levels depend on the amount of material disturbance and potential for dust. Exposure should be controlled to the lowest level possible. International organizations like ACGIH provide exposure limits for workers. Consult with an asbestos removal specialist before any renovation or demolition project to confirm the presence of asbestos. There is significant research to support the long-term health effects of asbestos exposure. If workers do not take precautions, they may develop serious chronic health problems or even die from an asbestos-related disease. Asbestos fibers are extremely fine and can remain suspended in the air for hours. When workers inhale these fibers, they are carried into the lower regions of the lung and cause fibrotic lung disease, asbestosis, and changes in the lining of the chest cavity. These diseases can lead to reduced respiratory function and death. Long-term inhalation of asbestos fibers increases the risk of asbestosis, lung cancer, mesothelioma, and pleural thickening. People are more likely to experience asbestos-related disorders if they are exposed to high concentrations of asbestos for longer periods of time and/or to asbestos more frequently. Let's review some best practices on how you can protect yourself from asbestos exposure. Asbestos work always begins with a review of safe work practices written specifically for their workplace to prevent exposure to asbestos. Workers need to be trained by a qualified person in the safe handling, use, and disposal of asbestos. Have access to a safety data sheet. Be informed of the health hazards associated with asbestos exposure. Demonstrate competency in their work. Containment is critical for asbestos operations. The work area needs to be physically sealed off to prevent the release of asbestos fibers into other areas. Signage is important to warn people of asbestos work in progress. Only authorized and protected workers should enter the contained work zone. Continuous ventilation is important inside the containment zone. A separate ventilation system, maintained under a negative pressure, is needed for high-risk work areas. The negative air pressure ventilation system must be exhausted to the outside of the building. The air must be tested and deemed safe for re-entry before the containment zone can be removed. Personal protective equipment, PPE, including respirators, is essential to control exposure. PPE should be disposable. It needs to be made of material that is a barrier to asbestos fibers. PPE needs to cover the entire body and fit snug at the head, neck, and feet. Respirators must be worn while working with or near asbestos. Tips for use include: 1. Respirators must match the type of work and asbestos concentration, as recommended by an occupational health professional. 2. Each worker must undergo annual fit testing for their respirator. 3. Inspect respirators for damage before use, perform negative and positive pressure seal checks, and clean and disinfect them after use. 4. Store respirators in a clean, sanitary location when not in use. 5. Improper respirator use can endanger health and safety. Good hygiene practices are important to control the exposure to asbestos. They can include no eating or drinking in any work area containing asbestos, frequent cleaning of the work area and immediately upon completion of work. Dust and waste should only be cleaned up and removed using a vacuum equipped with a HEPA filter or by damp mopping or wet sweeping. All dust and waste, including drop cloths, need to be disposed of in a labeled and approved container. Barriers and portable enclosures should not be reused unless they are rigid and can be thoroughly cleaned. Proper decontamination is specific to every worksite and task, but the goal is to allow workers to leave work with no asbestos fibers on their bodies or clothing. Double locker rooms sealed off from the contaminated work area allow workers a space to safely change for work into PPE while protecting their street clothes from exposure, as well as a space to remove their contaminated gear, shower, and dress at the end of their workday to minimize take-home exposure. A few other good decontamination practices to follow include: disposable PPE needs to be placed in a marked container. Tools and equipment also need to be cleaned. Label asbestos-contaminated laundry. A HEPA vacuum can be used to clean tools, equipment, and clothing, or damp wiping. Before the dangers of asbestos and secondary exposure were known, workers unknowingly brought asbestos fibers home on their clothes, hair, and body, exposing their families. Housewives got exposed to asbestos by shaking out dusty clothes, releasing fibers into the air, leading to illnesses decades later like pulmonary distress and mesothelioma. Tragically, children of asbestos workers were exposed too through simple acts of affection, like sitting on their father's lap, also developed mesothelioma years later. There are requirements for disposing materials containing asbestos. In general, asbestos waste needs to be placed in impervious containers inside a containment zone. It needs to be sealed and labeled as asbestos. Asbestos waste needs to be double-bagged. The outside of the waste container needs to be decontaminated before removing it in a waste transfer room. A damp wipe on the outside of the container or a HEPA vacuum may be used. Waste material should not accumulate and be transferred to a dump site for asbestos waste. Emergencies involving asbestos may include fires, ventilation system failures, or injuries. Emergency procedures should be tailored to your worksite, ensuring the safe evacuation and rescue of all workers. Conduct regular emergency drills to ensure preparedness. Post emergency procedures in the workplace for easy access and visibility. Smoking not only harms one's health, but also worsens the effects of other inhaled chemicals, such as asbestos. If you work with asbestos, detect health issues early with annual medical checkups, including exams, chest x-rays, lung function tests, and exposure history. That concludes this video on asbestos. If you have further questions, please contact your health and safety representative.